Hello, Jeff Zwaring, and welcome to Science Faith Connection, a segment of our show where we explore interesting scientific ideas and see how they connect to the truth of the Christian faith. Today I'm joined by my friend and colleague Ken Samples, and we're going to explore the topic of Bible contradictions. Ken, good to have you on the show today.
Hello, Jeff.
So there's a common idea out there that there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible. And I think if there were genuine contradictions, that would really argue against the truth of Christianity because the Bible is supposed to be a revelation from God. So I went, looked up on an atheist website, just some of the contradictions. I want to read a couple and just kind of get your response to them. So one of them is the Sabbath day. There's a passage in Exodus. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." But then Paul says in Romans, "One man esteems one day above another, another esteemed every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind." Or there's another one where it talks about seeing God, and Jacob is wrestling with God. It says, "I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved." But John later says, "No man has seen God at any time." So these are touted as contradictions to the Bible. Yeah. How do you respond to these contradictions?
Well, a contradiction is a very specific thing in logic. It's what we would say is A and non-A. Nothing can both be and not be at the same time in the same way. To put it in terms of information or facts, nothing can be true and false at the same time in the same way.
Okay.
Now, looking at those two specific examples, let's take the Sabbath issue. It's true that Judaism worshiped on the Sabbath day, sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. So they had a Saturday Sabbath. Christians, however, began to worship on Sunday because they saw it as the Lord's Day. They saw it as the day that Christ rose from the dead. So they weren't repudiating the Sabbath. They were recognizing that Sunday was a unique day in which Christ rose from the dead. So I don't see how those two things are contradictions. It could be that God is revealing things, and you can be a Christian and keep the Sabbath, but it's true, Christians worshiped on Sunday. I don't see that as a contradiction.
So it almost seems like when we're looking at the Bible, or any supposed Bible contradiction, we have to look at the context of each one and see, is this really saying the same thing, or saying two contradictory things? Right. Or is this from one perspective, this from another, something like that?
Yeah, and looking at the other alleged contradiction, well, it's true. There are people in the Old Testament who seem to have kind of encounters or visions of a religious nature, maybe seeing God, so to speak. And then in the New Testament, it does say that nobody can see God. But I think the appropriate context is nobody can see God in his essence. No one can encounter this infinite, eternal God in his full essence. It's not saying that people didn't have religious experiences where they thought they saw God working in their lives. I don't think either of those are serious contradictions. I think there are challenges in the Bible that are more serious than that. So, but simply because things are inconsistent don't mean they're contradictory.
So maybe these aren't the best examples. Let's deal with what are some of the things that genuinely appear contradictory, or that are bigger issues to deal with. What are some that you would say?
Well, I think if you were to look at maybe the central ideas of Scripture or the truth claims of Scripture, I think if you could maybe look at the resurrection and say, well, it seems as if the Bible is saying one thing about the resurrection over here and then another one over here. Not all of the data supporting the resurrection falls into perfect categories of consistencies. But I think when you look at that data as a whole, you can say, well, there is a way of explaining this kind of thing. And I think another thing that works in all of this, Jeff, is that Christians do believe in mystery, and a mystery would be like Jesus being both God and man. Now, I don't know exactly how Jesus is God and man. There are Christians who have proposed theories about how a single person could have a divine and human nature, but I don't think that the incarnation is a contradiction. I don't know I can't fully comprehend it, but I don't think it's a contradiction.
Well, your example there, Jesus' nature, that's getting at the heart of humanity. You know,
Right.
the Trinity has been raised as a contradiction. Is
Right.
God one or is God three?
That's right.
So let's kind of deal with the logic aspect of it. Let's stick with the Trinity. Is God being one and God being three a contradiction or not?
Well, I would say if we're saying that God is one and not one, three and not three, that seems like A and non-A. That seems like a contradiction. But of course, Christianity, and I'm thinking of the great church fathers, I'm thinking of Thomas Aquinas, the medieval scholar, Protestant thinkers, have always argued that the way that God is one, his essence or being, is different than the way he's three, his subsistence or personhood. So what we could say is God is one in category A, essence, but he's three in category B, personhood. So it's not A and non-A. The Law of Non-Contradiction says it has to be at the same time and in the same way. God's oneness and threeness are not in the same categories.
Well, it just struck me here that when we're talking about Jeff Zweerink or Ken Samples, I'm one person with one essence.
Right.
And so in some sense, when I'm dealing with the Trinity, I'm dealing with categories that are so foreign to my existence that it might appear contradictory when it really is just bigger than I can deal with.
That's exactly right. And I think that also includes the incarnation. Jesus is a single person, but his divinity and his humanity, they don't mix, they don't mingle, they're not blurred together, they do not negate one another. So the incarnation and the Trinity are genuine mysteries, but they can be articulated in a way in which they don't appear to be genuine contradictions.
You know what's interesting is that we talk about this in terms of theology and is Christianity contradictory, but I see this same phenomena play out in science. There's loads of experiments where it's like, what's going on here? Can we explain what it is? But I think even just when we talk about quantum mechanics, there's the wave-particle duality, that everything is both a wave and a particle. Well, you can't be a wave and a particle, except that the way it's a wave is different than the way it's a particle, or what experiment you're doing. It sounds a lot like the mystery we're dealing with here. It's not a contradiction, it's a mystery. So I find the same phenomena playing itself in science. How do you think about that?
I think that that's right. I think that there are plenty of things that we can't fully comprehend, whether it's in science, whether it's in philosophy, whether it's in theology. But simply because we can't fully comprehend them doesn't mean that it's an actual logical contradiction. And in one of my books, Christianity Cross-Examined, I use quantum mechanics and I look at it from that standpoint, that it can be a mystery, not a contradiction. The same way I think it applies to the Trinity and to the incarnation.
So when you encounter a contradiction in the Bible, how do we approach that? What would you recommend to someone who says, hey, this looks contradictory? How do we go about dealing with that?
Well, the Bible is a book. It is a series of books. It is a document, if you will. It's written in language. I think we have to approach it and say, what's the context that we're reading here? What's the original language? How does this passage in the Old Testament then relate to this other passage in the New Testament? That is, I think we should treat differences or challenges in the Bible the way we would approach them in other historical documents. And usually you're able to come to some way of reconciling those things.
Well, thanks, Ken. I really appreciate your comments. You know, we want to often portray as though Christianity is the place with contradictions. But the reality of it is when we look at science, whether we're looking at quantum mechanics, whether we're looking at the Trinity, there are things that appear mysterious to us. And those supposed contradictions, if we handle them properly, force us to dive deeper and gain a greater understanding of what's going on. And we see that both in theology and in science. You know, I'd encourage you to go to reasons.org. Ken's got a great blog. It's titled The Difference Between Mystery and Contradiction. Gives you a great tools to explore how we can use these purported contradictions to get a better understanding of who God is, who Christ is, and how we can know him better.